In psychology, we talk about avoidance behavior. How can we tell how much we're being influenced?
Making both big and daily life decisions can define the way our lives turn out. And sometimes we're so afraid of what might happen that we end up not making these decisions to avoid the consequences. But what if these consequences were great? What if they bring new opportunities and chances to grow? So, Steve, why do you think we sometimes stay in situations that we're not really happy in? So, like in jobs or relationships, why do you think it's so hard to make that decision to leave?
Well, in psychology, we talk about avoidance behavior. And sometimes people get trapped in trying to avoid bad consequences that might not actually be likely. And so they're just continuously staying in the same situation. Bad relationship, bad job, etc. Don't want to rock the boat. That can be a poor choice because they're being driven by the emotional experience of a past choice that isn't relevant today. Also, the idea that there is always a reward for compliance with a social norm or with the expectations of a partner or your family who may or may not know all the information about what's going on. So let's say you're in an abusive relationship. You may feel you don't want to look like a failure having a failed marriage or a failed relationship. You might feel pressured by your family to stay married because it's part of the value system because of your culture or your religion, for example. Or you're getting something out of the relationship that you like that gives you some relief from the other part of the relationship, which is abusive. That's a combination of things going on. They're getting a reward, and then they're also getting punished, but they're trapped in a cycle. They're not paying attention. So they're not doing a balanced, full-fledged calculation of all the factors. They're being compartmentalized in their thinking, and they're just considering in the moment what's going on now, and that's good. So they're not thinking about the future. They're not doing a good calculation. They're not being very aware of their whole situation. That's what needs to happen in order to make better choices, to be more aware of your emotions, to be more aware of what happens, and to be more aware of your thinking.
What role do emotions play in decision making?
Emotions are reflective of internal thought processes that you may not be consciously aware of. So you might have just a quick flash of an emotion when you consider a choice. So you have to pay attention to what your mind at all levels is telling you, because some part of you is anticipating the result of the choice, and your emotions are informing you of what it will feel like in the future.
So let's talk a bit about fear of failure that you mentioned before. What insights do you have about embracing failure as a part of the decision-making process?
Well, I think it's been widely discussed, and maybe it's even a meme these days, that we have to embrace failure to succeed. And I think a lot of motivational speakers talk about that, and other success coaches, et cetera, talk about these things. But it's obvious when you think about it that you need to go through the process of trial and error in order to discover the truth of something. So without making mistakes, how would you know if something works or doesn't work when we cannot predict the future? If you don't allow yourself to have an error or a mistake, then you can't move forward and you can't discover the truth. So you have to give yourself permission to try something, and it doesn't work out. That's the only way we can learn.
So what role do you think our community and support network play in our decision making?
We are influenced by how we imagine other people perceive us. So unless we live, somewhere in an isolated place away from everyone, all the factors are in play all the time. How can we tell how much we're being influenced? Well, there's where emotions come into play. The emotional reaction that we have related to how we imagine something might work out in the future, or any thoughts related to how we see ourselves being perceived by others, when that is a very, very strong response, then you know you're being heavily influenced by that idea.
Having practiced clinical psychology for 25 years, what's usually the most common barrier that people can't overcome when it comes to decision making?
They don't trust themselves to be able to make a good decision. They question their ability to think a problem through. They ignore their emotions. And often, they just don't value themselves sufficiently to give them the confidence to make a good choice, that they may already know what the better choice is.
I felt very called out. Okay. As a neuroscientist, what does research say about how decisions are processed in the brain?
Well, there's a lot of controversy about that. There's a lot of discussion about the prefrontal cortex, which I think is very old neuroscience that isn't been updated. However, in terms of how we make decisions, it is a multifactorial process that is not well understood. And when we try to mechanize the human body or the human brain, we oversimplify it, and I think we lose a lot of understanding. So each of us being alive, we make decisions, and for all we know, it incorporates every cell in our body. This is so vastly complex that the attempts that have been made over the centuries to simplify it into a mechanism are ridiculously overly simplistic and don't even begin to capture the dynamic and complex thing that a living organism is, especially human beings, which are, with our complex brains, the most complicated thing we know of in the universe. Also, we have other evidence that shows that people with severe acquired brain injury, loss of large sections of brain tissue, somehow mysteriously are able to restore functioning. And how does that happen if, as you say, or as the studies claim, that all of this particular type of functioning is taking place in this certain area? So good science always makes suggestions and brings discoveries to our attention that increases our knowledge and understanding. But we have a long way to go before we can make conclusions like decision-making takes place in the prefrontal cortex. Surely some important elements of decision-making take place in the prefrontal cortex, but that's not enough to explain the phenomenon.
How can we balance our thoughts and emotions?
I guess the easiest answer to that question is to always remember that emotions are the physiological experience of the thoughts that we're having, both those that we're aware of and those that are happening below our awareness, referred to as unconscious, right? So when we are overwhelmed by ideas, one after the other, cascading in our mind, and those ideas are giving us a variety of emotional experiences, one after the other, what's happening is we're being overwhelmed by the cascading ideas or thoughts or cognitions. And we're not paying attention to necessarily all of the emotions that are attached to them. At the same time, if we're just in our emotional experience and we're not in touch with the thoughts that we're having, then we're just feeling our feelings and not really clear on what we're thinking or why we're thinking it. So the idea, I believe, that the neurocog system tries to embrace and to teach and to train is that we need to raise our awareness of both elements of our experience, that emotions are the physical manifestation of thoughts that we're having, ideas we're having, perceptions we're having, and that we have to pay attention to both at the same time. So if you're lost in your thoughts or you're lost in your feelings, it means you're not paying attention to the other one. time to maybe start paying attention to the other one.
So you've got an app that helps you do all of this. Can you run me through an exercise of how Nuri might help me make a better decision?
So Nuri has a core tool called the emotion log. And by emotion logging, we can see the shifts that occur as a result of doing something. So there are exercises in Nuri. So you can go through a process of evaluating your thinking. You can go through a process of doing a breathing exercise and noticing a physiological change. It can help you calm down. You can do a VisiCalm exercise, which will help you calm down physically as well by shifting your perspective to something that's more calming. And then when you do the before and the after emotions, that log of your emotions, that emotion log, shows you the shift, the change that enables you to see that you have control. That in itself can be helpful. So measure your emotions before, you measure emotions afterward, and that gives you the perspective that lets you see how you're influenced by different factors, whether it's your relationships, whether it's your work, whether it's stuff you do for fun, whether it's things that are involved with your physical health. All of that is in the mix, and our emotional experience of life is our life.
So I am contemplating perhaps making a big purchase, and it's giving me a little bit of anxiety. Can you run me through the recommended steps of how I could use Nuri to help me make a better informed decision?
I'd like to reframe that a little differently. The recommended steps, I would just say Nuri is a tool to help us develop a natural way of making good choices by being more aware of what we're thinking and how those thoughts impact our emotional experience, and being very clear on what our emotion experience is. So if there's a big choice coming up and we're having ambivalence and anxiety mixed together, on the one hand, on the other hand, on the one hand, on the other hand, we're going back and forth, and we can't make a choice because we're trapped by too many ideas about what might happen. And we feel paralyzed by that process. And it gets unclear in our mind what we're doing and how to do it. Then what Nuri does is it helps us lay down which ideas have which emotional impact and what the specifics of those emotions are. What are the feeling words that come up? How strong is that emotion? And then if we do a pro-con, for example, we can see the long-term and short-term consequences, positive and negative, of that choice. So it helps us by taking all this data in our minds and laying it out in an organized way so we can make a clearer understanding of it all. So that's what you can do. And there's no one prescribed way. There's no specific exact series of steps. It's not like a formula. It is unique to each person, and they can discover, based on their own style and approach, what makes them more capable of being aware. So it's the awareness is the critical element. Building your awareness, building your emotional and cognitive awareness is what gives you the capacity to make better choices.
That was Dr. Steve Wolfson on The Good Shift. Thanks for listening to today's episode. We hope you found it insightful. Don't forget, you can listen to more episodes on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. For extra tips and updates, follow us on Instagram and TikTok to learn more about the Nuri app. Download the app to access exercises that enhance your emotional awareness and help you make better decisions aligned with your life goals. See you next time.